You know, it's a strange thing we humans do. We wake up in the morning, look into the mirror, and start a trial that never ends. The courtroom is our mind. The defendant is our past self. And the charges? Every word we wish we hadn't said. Every mistake that still echoes when the room is quiet. We become both the accuser and the accused, sentencing ourselves for crimes committed by someone who no longer exists. Have you noticed that? The person you once were, the one who stumbled, lied, froze, lashed out, ran away, they aren't here anymore. That version of you was working with the understanding it had at the time, limited, frightened, hopeful in clumsy ways. And yet, from the vantage point of new awareness, you look back and expect them to have known what you know now. It's like yelling at a child for not speaking a language they hadn't yet learned. We confuse regret with responsibility. We think punishing ourselves is how we prove we've grown. But guilt doesn't purify, it only hardens. It's like trying to clean a wound by stabbing it again. What we call atonement is often just resistance to the simple fact that life was always doing its best through us, even when it looked like failure. And so we carry our mistakes like sacred relics, polishing them with memory, afraid that if we set them down we'll forget the lesson. But here's the paradox. The lesson only begins when you finally let go. Forgiveness doesn't start with "I was wrong." It begins with "I was learning." The same is true for the world. Every cruelty, every injustice, every person who has hurt you was, in their blindness, also learning. When you see that, the sharp edges soften. The endless trial quiets. Today, I want to share with you 5 illusions that keep us from forgiving ourselves, others, and life itself. Each one a trick of the mind that turns healing into punishment. Because maybe, just maybe, nothing truly needs forgiveness at all, only understanding. So the question is, are you ready to stop fighting what's already forgiven? Have you ever noticed how cruel we can be to the person we used to be? We replay old scenes in our minds like prosecutors preparing evidence, every word, every choice, every moment when we should have known better. We treat our past selves as if they were villains in a story we now wish we'd written differently. But tell me, how could you have known what you didn't know yet? How could you have chosen differently when you hadn't yet lived the days that would teach you? This is the first illusion that keeps forgiveness at arm's length, the illusion of the perfect self. The fantasy that there was a right way you failed to find. It's like standing at the top of a mountain, blaming the child who once struggled through the valley for not seeing the view. The climb was the lesson, the mistakes were the map. Think of life as a painter's studio. Each experience is a brushstroke. Some are messy, heavy, even clumsy. But remove them, and the whole painting loses depth. We keep wanting to retouch our past, to clean the smudges, forgetting that those smudges are what gave the image its soul. I once met a man who said, "If only I hadn't wasted those years." And I asked him, wasted for who? He paused. Because the truth was, those so-called wasted years were the very soil that grew his compassion. Without them, he'd still be judging others for mistakes he never had the courage to make himself. Psychologically, this illusion is the ego's favorite trick. The ego whispers, "You could have done better." It pretends it's guiding you toward virtue, but really it's protecting itself from vulnerability. To forgive your past self would mean admitting that you were never in control to begin with, that life was happening through you, not because of you. But here's the twist. When you stop demanding perfection from who you were, you start discovering kindness in who you are. You see that every version of you was simply doing its best to love, to survive, to make sense of things. Forgiveness becomes less about erasing the past and more about bowing to it. Try this. Tonight, write a letter to your younger self, not to correct them, but to thank them. Thank them for trying, for stumbling, for learning. Read it aloud, softly. You'll feel something loosen inside you, the beginning of peace. And maybe then, for the first time, you'll realize you were never broken. You were only becoming. You see, when someone hurts us, the mind instantly reaches for balance. We want fairness, correction, something to tip the scales back to even. And when that doesn't come, we hold on to the pain as if it were proof that justice still matters. We tell ourselves, "I can't forgive until they pay." But forgiveness isn't about payment, it's about freedom. We've been taught that anger is strength, that resentment keeps us safe, that holding on protects us from being hurt again. But resentment is not a shield, it's a chain. It keeps you tied to the very story you want to escape. It's like carrying a torch through the night, thinking it will light your path, not realizing the flame is burning your own hand. I once knew a woman who had been betrayed by her closest friend. For years she replayed the scene, the lies, the coldness, the shock of realizing trust had been broken. She carried that memory like a stone in her chest. When I asked her what she feared would happen if she forgave, she said, "If I let it go, it'll mean what they did was okay." But that's the illusion, the belief that forgiveness erases accountability. It doesn't. It simply releases you from being the jailer of someone else's sin. Psychologically, the need for vengeance comes from confusion between power and pain. We think if we stop hurting, we'll lose control of the story. But pain is not power, it's repetition. Every time you revisit the memory, you rehearse your suffering. You memorize it so well that it becomes your identity, the one who was wronged. Here's the twist. When you finally put the torch down, you realize the fire was never lighting the way, it was only keeping the darkness alive. Forgiveness is not surrender. It's the refusal to keep bleeding for something that's already over. Try this simple thing. Close your eyes and picture the person or event that still stings. See yourself holding that torch. Then imagine setting it down. Watch the smoke rise and disappear. Feel how much lighter your hand becomes. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Because the moment you stop demanding justice from the past, you start experiencing peace in the present. And in that peace, you see life has its own way of balancing what we could never control. You know, one of the strangest things about pain is how personal it feels. When someone wounds us, we say, "You did this to me," as if the suffering were a private storm, sealed off from the rest of existence. But look closer, and you'll see something far more mysterious happening. Pain moves like wind. It doesn't belong to anyone. It simply passes through whoever is open enough to feel it. This is the third illusion, the illusion of separation, the belief that we are isolated islands, and that forgiveness is a gift one shore sends to another. But life doesn't work that way. Every act of cruelty, every harsh word, every selfish moment is not a single person's doing. It's pain being passed along, looking for a place to rest. Hurt people, as they say, but few truly grasp what that means. It isn't a slogan. It's the secret mechanism of the human heart. Imagine a forest scolding one of its trees for catching fire. The other trees don't see that the flame leapt from another branch, carried by the wind, born from a lightning strike miles away. When you hold hatred toward someone, you're doing the same, blaming a tree instead of understanding the fire. I once taught a young student who was angry at everything. He insulted others, mocked kindness, turned every smile into a weapon. At first, I judged him. Then one day, he told me, almost casually, that no one had ever hugged him without hitting him afterward. And suddenly, the whole story made sense. His cruelty was not malice, it was memory repeating itself. He wasn't an enemy. He was an echo. Psychologically, we call this projection, the unconscious passing of our own pain onto others. Spiritually, it's the great forgetting that we are expressions of the same life, bumping into ourselves in different disguises. Here's the twist. When you stop seeing others as them, forgiveness stops being effort. It becomes understanding. The anger softens into compassion, not because you excuse the wound, but because you finally see the wounder as wounded too. So next time someone lashes out, pause, don't react. Instead, ask silently what pain might be speaking through them. That single question breaks the illusion of separation. And in that moment, you're not a victim or a savior, you're a witness of life healing itself through awareness. We humans have a funny habit. We think forgiveness is something we can do, as if it were a task we could schedule between errands. We tell ourselves, "I should forgive by now," like we're checking off a to-do list for the soul. But forgiveness doesn't obey deadlines. It doesn't bend to willpower. It blooms when understanding is ready, not a moment sooner. This is the fourth illusion, the illusion of control. The belief that we can manage the heart the way we manage a calendar. We imagine we can think our way into peace. But have you ever noticed that the more you try to forgive, the more the hurt resists? It's like pushing against a river and wondering why you feel exhausted. I once met a man who said, "I've tried every method to forgive. I meditate, I journal, I even wrote a letter I'll never send, but the pain still comes back." And I told him, maybe that's because you're trying to get rid of it, not understand it. Forgiveness doesn't mean banishing pain. It means sitting beside it long enough to learn its language. The heart, like the tide, doesn't release on command. It releases when it feels safe. Psychologically, control is how the ego tries to stay in charge of chaos. It says, if I can forgive on my terms, I'll prove I'm stronger than the pain. But the truth is, you were never in charge of the tides, only of whether you resist or float. Here's the twist. Forgiveness isn't an act of control. It's the surrender of control. It's realizing the river knows where it's going even when you don't. When you stop forcing the flow, the current carries you somewhere lighter, somewhere real. So instead of asking, how do I forgive? Try asking, what in me still needs to be seen before forgiveness can happen? Then, listen, wait, breathe. You'll notice something gentle begin to shift. Not a thunderclap of release, but a soft loosening the way ice turns to water without fanfare. That's forgiveness, arriving quietly in its own time. Not because you commanded it, but because you finally stopped trying to. There's a special category we keep hidden deep within us. A place labeled too much pain, too much betrayal, too much regret. We whisper to ourselves, I can forgive the small things, but not that. We believe some wounds are sacred in their suffering, that to let them go would somehow dishonor what we've endured. But that is the final illusion, the illusion of the unforgivable. You see, when we declare something unforgivable, we're really saying, this pain is who I am now. We wrap our identity around the wound like armor. It gives us purpose, a reason for our bitterness, a story to hold when everything else feels uncertain. But living like that is like clutching a burning coal to prove you've been burned. It doesn't protect you, it only keeps the fire alive. I once met a woman who carried unspeakable grief. Someone had taken something from her that could never be returned. For years, she said, I will never forgive, and she didn't. Not until one morning she realized that the person she was refusing to forgive no longer existed, not in the world, and not in her memory as she once remembered them. What she'd been punishing all along was a ghost, a shape made of her own pain. The anger that had once felt righteous had turned into a kind of poison, quietly dissolving her joy. Forgiveness, she discovered, wasn't saying it's okay. It was saying, it happened, and I won't let it define me anymore. It wasn't about the person who hurt her at all. It was about reclaiming her life from their shadow. Psychologically, the unforgivable is a defense, the mind's way of avoiding the unbearable truth that everything, even pain, eventually changes form. Spiritually, it's the final gate of awakening, to see that what you call unforgivable is still part of life's unfolding, messy, mysterious, and strangely meaningful. So here's the twist. The world doesn't need you to forget. It doesn't even need you to condone. It only asks that you stop carrying what's already over. Because the moment you release that weight, something extraordinary happens. The wound becomes wisdom. The scar becomes light. And maybe then you'll see that nothing was ever truly unforgivable, only misunderstood. So here we are at the quiet edge where all the stories end. The mirror that once accused you has softened. The reflection still shows the same face, the same eyes, but something invisible has changed. The trial is over. The judge, the jury, and the prisoner were all you, and they've all been set free. Look back at the path you've walked. Every stumble was a teacher, every wound a doorway, every mistake a message written in a language you only now begin to understand. You were never meant to get it right the first time. You were meant to see, to live, to fall, to rise, to learn how to love through it all. That's not failure, that's evolution. Forgiveness, you realize, was never a moral achievement. It was the simple act of stepping out of resistance, allowing life to be what it was always trying to be through you. To forgive yourself is to stop arguing with the past. To forgive the world is to stop demanding that it behave according to your expectations. Both are the same surrender. Both are love in motion. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you no longer demand that anyone, including yourself, be different, people begin to change. Not because you forced them to, but because the energy of blame has dissolved. Life relaxes when you do. The heart begins to breathe again. So let's come back to where we started. The mirror, the reflection, the one who once thought they were broken. Whisper to them now, softly, you're forgiven. Not because you earned it, but because life itself has already moved on. You can too. You are not the mistake. You are the awareness that learned from it. You are not the pain. You are the presence that held it until it turned to wisdom. You are not the wound, you are the healing. So tonight, choose one thing, just one, to set down. One memory, one resentment, one guilt that's ready to rest. Let it fall. Feel the space that opens when it's gone. That space is you. That space is freedom. The door is open now. The past has already walked through. All that remains is this moment, pure, unburdened, awake. Step through it, because you were never broken. You were only remembering who you've been all along.